My name is Rachel. I'm 34 years old, and 6 months ago, my younger sister walked into my wedding reception wearing a floor length white gown, clinked her champagne glass during the father daughter dance, and announced to 200 guests that she was pregnant with twins. She stood there, one hand on her stomach, the other clutching a glass of what I now know was sparkling cider, while my father's arm went rigid around my waist. The music stopped. My new husband's jaw dropped. My mother started crying tears of joy, rushing toward my sister like I wasn't even standing there in my own wedding dress, on my own dance floor during my own first dance with my father. What I didn't know in that moment was that my father had spent the last 3 months preparing for exactly this possibility, and what he said next would change everything. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times since then. The way my sister's eyes found mine across the room, the slight smirk at the corner of her glossed lips, the way she positioned herself directly under the spotlight meant for the cake cutting. She knew exactly what she was doing. She'd been doing versions of it my entire life. But this time, for the first time ever, someone was ready for her. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time is it there. I have a feeling a lot of you have sisters or mothers or someone in your life who has made every milestone about themselves, and I want you to know you're not alone. Let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in Maple Ridge, a suburb about 40 minutes outside of Portland, Oregon. Nice houses with big backyards, good schools. The kind of place where people put inflatable decorations out for every holiday and know their mail carrier by name. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. My father, David, was a financial advisor with his own small practice. My mother, Caroline, was a former beauty queen turned stay-at-home mom who treated our family like her personal PR campaign. And then there was my sister, Vanessa. Vanessa is 3 years younger than me. She came into the world screaming, and she never really stopped. Everything about her was bigger, louder, more demanding of attention. By the time she was 2, she'd figured out that crying got her whatever she wanted. By 5, she'd learned that telling my mother I'd hit her would result in me being grounded. No questions asked. By 10, she was a master manipulator, and my parents were her willing puppets. I need you to understand something. I don't say this with anger anymore. It took me years of therapy to be able to talk about my childhood without my voice shaking. I'm sharing this because I need you to understand the pattern before I can show you what broke it. My earliest clear memory of Vanessa stealing a moment from me happened when I was 8 years old. It was May 14th, 2001. And I'd just finished my first piano recital at the Maple Ridge Community Center. I'd practiced for months. Chopsticks, but played perfectly, without a single wrong note. My piano teacher, Mrs. Patterson, told my parents I was gifted. I remember standing on that small stage, the lights warm on my face, my fingers finding every key exactly right, and feeling like maybe I was special. Maybe I was good at something. After the recital, my parents took us out for ice cream at Friendly's. I ordered a strawberry sundae because it was my favorite, and I remember my dad saying he was proud of me. Those 3 words felt like gold. He wasn't a man who gave compliments easily. My mother was already on her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd taken, when Vanessa suddenly slumped forward in the booth and announced that she felt sick. Within seconds, my mother was all over her, feeling her forehead, asking what hurt, demanding to know if someone had given her something bad to eat. The waitress came over, concerned. My father's proud smile faded into worry. And there I sat, strawberry sundae melting in front of me, recital program still clutched in my hands, watching my moment dissolve like sugar in water. Vanessa, of course, made a miraculous recovery by the time we got home. She was jumping on her bed an hour later. But when I asked my mother if we could put my recital trophy on the mantel, she said she'd do it later. She never did. I found that trophy in a box in the garage when I was 23, helping my parents prepare for a move. The little gold pianist was covered in dust. I told myself it didn't matter. Kids get sick. It wasn't Vanessa's fault. Except it kept happening. June 19th, 2005. I was 12. It was my birthday, and for the first time ever, my parents let me have a real sleepover party. 6 girls from my class, sleeping bags in the living room, a rented copy of The Princess Diaries, and a homemade chocolate cake my grandmother had driven 3 hours to bake. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was the only adult in my life who seemed to see what was happening. She'd pull me aside during holiday visits and tell me I was stronger than I knew. She'd slip $20 bills into my palm and whisper that they were just for me. That night, she was supposed to stay the whole weekend. The sleepover started at 6. By 7:30, all my friends were there, and we were in the middle of a dance party in the living room. I was wearing a purple dress my grandmother had bought me, and for once, I felt like a normal kid having a normal birthday. Then Vanessa came downstairs. She was 9 years old, and she'd somehow gotten into my mother's makeup. Bright red lipstick, blue eyeshadow up to her eyebrows, and what I later learned was my grandmother's pearl necklace around her throat. She planted herself in the middle of our dance circle and announced that she was going to perform a talent show. My friends looked at me. I looked at my mother, who was standing in the kitchen doorway with a glass of wine. She just smiled and said, "Let her have her fun." Vanessa proceeded to perform a 20-minute medley of Britney Spears songs, badly, while my friends sat there in awkward silence. When she finally finished, my mother led everyone in applause. Then she brought out the cake, but instead of carrying it to me, she handed it to Vanessa to hold while she lit the candles. In every single photo from that birthday, Vanessa is holding my cake. My grandmother pulled my mother aside after. I couldn't hear what they said, but I could hear the tone, sharp and disappointed. That night, after my friends went to sleep, I heard my parents arguing. My mother's voice, high and defensive. My grandmother left the next morning, 3 days early. She hugged me extra hard and whispered into my hair, "Never forget who you are, sweetheart." She passed away 2 years later from a stroke. I was 14, and I cried for 3 weeks straight. At her funeral, Vanessa wore a bright pink dress because, as she told anyone who would listen, Grandma would have wanted me to add color to this sad day. My mother thought it was charming. I thought about how my grandmother was the only person who ever made me feel seen, and now she was gone. But still, I told myself Vanessa was young. She didn't understand. September 3rd, 2009. I was 16, and I'd just gotten my first boyfriend. His name was Michael Reeves, and he had brown hair and played guitar and wrote me a poem for our 1-month anniversary. In my teenage brain, we were destined for marriage. Vanessa was 13, and I should have known better than to bring him to the house. She came downstairs in a crop top and shorts so small my father actually made her change, but not before she'd batted her eyes at Michael and told him he looked like a Jonas brother. She lingered in the living room while we tried to watch a movie. She accidentally spilled lemonade on his lap and used the opportunity to dab at his jeans with a paper towel. She asked him if he thought she was pretty, and when he stammered that she was a nice kid, she ran upstairs crying that he'd called her ugly. My mother came down 10 minutes later and asked Michael to leave. He broke up with me the next day. He said my family was too weird. I found out later that Vanessa had sent him a message on MySpace telling him that I'd said mean things about his guitar playing. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. When I confronted Vanessa, she cried and said she just wanted him to like her. My mother told me I was being too hard on my sister. She's only 13, Rachel. She doesn't understand what she's doing, but I saw her face when Michael left. I saw the satisfaction there. She understood exactly what she was doing. By the time I left for college, I learned to keep my life as far from Vanessa as possible. I went to University of Oregon, 2.5 hours away, and I called home once a week out of obligation. My mother would talk for 20 minutes about whatever Vanessa was doing, cheerleading, homecoming court, the boy she was dating, and then ask how my classes were in the same tone she'd used to ask about the weather. But distance wasn't enough. Vanessa found ways to reach into my life even when I wasn't there. April 20th, 2013. I was 20 years old and in my junior year. I'd been dating a guy named Marcus for 8 months. He was pre-med, kind, patient, and completely in love with me. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone's priority. That Easter, I made the mistake of bringing him home to meet my family. Vanessa was 17. She'd grown into her features by then, tall and blonde like our mother, with the kind of effortless confidence that made people pay attention. I walked in with Marcus's hand in mine, and I watched her eyes move over him like she was assessing a purchase. The weekend was a disaster from the first hour. Vanessa found reasons to touch him constantly. A hand on his arm when she laughed at his jokes, leaning over his shoulder to look at his phone, sitting next to him at every meal and pressing her leg against his under the table. He told me later that it made him uncomfortable, but he didn't want to cause drama by saying something. On Easter Sunday, I came downstairs early to help my mother with breakfast and found Vanessa already in the kitchen, wearing nothing but an oversized t-shirt and underwear, making pancakes for Marcus. She said she'd heard him get up and wanted to be a good hostess. I lost it. For the first time in my life, I screamed at her. I called her manipulative. I called her desperate. I said she couldn't stand to see me happy and that everyone knew exactly what she was doing. She burst into tears, ran to my mother, and sobbed that I'd called her terrible names just because she was trying to be nice. My mother asked me to apologize. My father said nothing and left the room. Marcus and I drove back to Eugene that afternoon, and he was quiet the whole way. We broke up 3 weeks later. He said he couldn't handle the baggage. I didn't blame him. That night, after the breakup, I called my father from my dorm room. I was crying so hard I could barely get the words out. I asked him why nobody ever took my side, why Vanessa could do anything and be forgiven while I was always the bad guy. There was silence on the other end for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, in a voice I'd never heard before, he said, "I know, Rachel. I see it. I've always seen it." I was so stunned I stopped crying. "You see it?" He sighed, the kind of sigh that carries years of exhaustion. "Your mother and your sister are very similar. They feed off each other. I've tried to say things, but your mother shuts me down. She doesn't want to hear it. She sees Vanessa as herself, the pretty one, the special one. And you're sure—" He paused. "What? What am I?" "You're like me," he said quietly. "You're the one who sees things as they are. And that makes you a threat." I didn't know what to do with that. Part of me wanted to scream at him. If he saw it all along, why didn't he protect me? Why did he let it happen? But another part of me felt something I hadn't felt in years. Validated? Someone else knew. Someone else saw the truth. We didn't talk about it again for a long time. That conversation became something unspoken between us, a shared acknowledgement that we never discussed, but both remembered. I finished college, got a job as a marketing coordinator at a small firm in Seattle, and slowly built a life that Vanessa couldn't touch. Or so I thought. I met Daniel at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill on March 3rd, 2019. I was 26, finally feeling settled in my career, living in a tiny apartment with a view of the Space Needle if you leaned out the window at exactly the right angle. He was behind me in line at Victrola, and when I fumbled my wallet and sent coins scattering across the floor, he got down on his knees to help me pick them up. He looked up at me with these warm brown eyes and smiled. "You've got Canadian quarters in here," he said. "Nice." I laughed. I had no idea where the Canadian quarters came from. Still don't. He asked if he could buy my coffee. I said yes. We talked for 2 hours. By the time we left, I knew his middle name was James. He was a civil engineer who built bridges. His mother had passed away when he was 12, and he had a rescue dog named Biscuit, who was afraid of stairs. I also knew I was going to marry him someday. We dated for 2 years. He met my family exactly 3 times. The first was at Thanksgiving in 2019. I watched Vanessa's eyes do that familiar assessment when Daniel walked in, but something was different. She was 23 by then, engaged to a guy named Tyler who worked in pharmaceutical sales and drove a BMW. Maybe she'd outgrown the competition. Maybe Tyler was enough for her. She was polite, charming even. My mother fawned over Daniel and kept touching his arm. My father shook his hand firmly and nodded at me with something like approval. It was the best family visit I'd ever had. The second visit was Christmas that same year. Same energy. Vanessa showed off her engagement ring, a massive princess-cut diamond that my parents had helped pay for, and I genuinely congratulated her. I thought maybe we'd finally turned a corner. Maybe we could be sisters for real. The third visit was in March of 2020, right before the world shut down. Daniel and I had driven down to help my parents set up their new home office for remote work. Vanessa was there too, and this time something was off. Tyler wasn't with her. She was quiet, picking at her food, barely engaging in conversation. When I asked if she was okay, she snapped at me that she was fine. Later, I found out from my mother that Tyler had called off the engagement. He'd apparently met someone at work, a pharmaceutical rep from the competing company, and they'd been having an affair for 6 months. Vanessa was devastated. And as awful as it sounds, my first thought wasn't sympathy, it was fear. A wounded Vanessa was a dangerous Vanessa. Okay, I need to pause here for a second. Have you ever had that moment where you knew something bad was coming but you couldn't prove it? Where your gut was screaming at you to run, but your brain kept saying you were overreacting? Drop a yes in the comments if you've been there. And if this story is hitting close to home, please hit that like button so more people can find it. The pandemic kept us apart for over a year. Daniel and I hunkered down in our apartment, both working from home, and honestly, it was wonderful. We adopted a cat named Mochi. We learned to make sourdough like everyone else. We had Zoom calls with my parents every few weeks where Vanessa would pop in and out, looking increasingly unmoored. She'd moved back in with my parents after Tyler left. She said it was temporary, just until she got back on her feet. But the months stretched on. She started going through our mother's wine collection. She dated a string of men she met on apps, guys who never lasted more than a few weeks. She started posting cryptic things on Instagram about people who betrayed her and snakes in human form. I tried to reach out. I sent her a care package with her favorite chocolates and a nice candle. I left voicemails checking in. She responded with one-word texts. Fine, busy, whatever. Then, in August of 2021, Daniel proposed. It was on a Tuesday evening, which sounds unromantic, but it was perfect. We'd ordered Thai food and were eating on our tiny balcony, watching the sunset turn the city gold. He got down on one knee right there, balancing a velvet box on top of a container of pad thai, and asked me to spend the rest of my life with him. I said yes so fast I knocked over my wine. I called my parents that night. My mother squealed and immediately started talking about venues and colors and whether I'd consider having the wedding in Portland so she could use her preferred florist. My father's voice cracked when he said he was happy for me. And then my mother put Vanessa on the phone. "Congratulations," she said flatly. That's great. Thank you, I said, trying to sound warm. I hope you'll be one of my bridesmaids. There was a long pause. Sure, whatever you want. That should have been my first warning sign. Vanessa never agreed to be in a supporting role without a fight, but I was so happy, so caught up in the glow of engagement, that I let it go. We set the date for June 18th, 2022, almost a year out. My mother threw herself into planning with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She called me every day with updates and opinions. She started a Pinterest board. She joined a Facebook group for mothers of the bride. Vanessa, meanwhile, seemed to fade into the background. She attended the engagement party in October, wearing a black dress that seemed a little too funeral for the occasion, but she smiled for photos and said all the right things. She came to the dress fittings and nodded approvingly at my choices. She didn't offer opinions, didn't try to take over, didn't do anything that set off my internal alarm system. Okay, she's changed, I told Daniel one night after a particularly pleasant Zoom call with my family. Maybe Tyler leaving broke something loose. Maybe she's finally growing up. Daniel raised an eyebrow. He'd heard enough stories by then to be skeptical. Maybe, he said carefully. Or maybe she's just waiting. I ignored him. I wanted to believe. I wanted for once to have a normal sister and a normal family and a normal wedding. In December, Vanessa started dating someone new. His name was Grant, and according to my mother, he was wonderful. A chiropractor with his own practice in Lake Oswego. Tall, handsome, came from a good family. I was happy for her, genuinely happy. Maybe if she had her own life, she'd stop trying to disrupt mine. They got serious fast. By February, he'd moved into my parents' house with her, since she was still living there. By March, she was posting pictures of them everywhere, calling him her soulmate, her forever person. My mother was thrilled. She started hinting that maybe Vanessa would get engaged soon too, and wouldn't it be wonderful if they had a double wedding? I shut that down immediately. No, absolutely not. This is my wedding. My mother sighed dramatically. You're so possessive, Rachel. There's enough love to go around. But I held firm, and eventually she dropped it. The planning continued. I found my dream dress at a boutique in Seattle, a classic A-line with delicate lace sleeves and a train that felt like floating on clouds. My bridesmaids, my two best friends from college, and Vanessa, were fitted for sage green dresses that complemented everyone's skin tone. The venue was booked, an old estate called Whitmore Gardens about an hour outside of Portland, with stone walls and climbing roses, and a ballroom that looked like something out of a fairy tale. Everything was coming together. And then, in April, exactly 2 months before my wedding, Vanessa called me directly for the first time in years. I need to tell you something, she said without preamble. I was at work, in the middle of reviewing a campaign proposal. Okay, what's up? I'm pregnant. I sat back in my chair. The fluorescent lights of the office suddenly felt very bright. Wow, I said slowly. That's... congratulations? Thank you, she said, and her voice had that familiar edge, that sharpness that meant she was testing me. We weren't planning it, but Grant is thrilled. I'm sure he is. That's wonderful news, Vanessa. I'm due in November. So I'll be showing at your wedding. I just wanted you to know. There it was. The real purpose of the call. Not to share happy news with her sister, but to inform me that she'd be visibly pregnant on my wedding day. A built-in excuse to be the center of attention. That's fine, I said, keeping my voice neutral. We can adjust your bridesmaid dress if needed. Oh, I was thinking maybe I shouldn't be a bridesmaid at all. You know, since I'll be so uncomfortable. I could just be a guest. If that's what you want. Another pause. She'd expected a fight. She wanted a fight. I wasn't going to give her one. I mean, she continued, it just makes more sense. I don't want to take away from your day. That's very considerate of you. Thanks for letting me know." She hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I told Daniel about the call. He listened quietly, then said, "She's going to do something at the wedding." "Maybe not," I said, but I didn't believe it. She literally called to announce she'd be pregnant and showing, right? "I know." He took my hand. "We can elope. Just you and me, somewhere beautiful. Forget the whole thing." I loved him for suggesting it, but I'd been waiting my whole life for one day that was just mine. One day where I didn't have to share. One day where I could be the bride, the center, the special one. I wasn't going to let Vanessa take that too. "No," I said, "we're having the wedding. I'm not running anymore." I called my father that weekend. It was a Saturday morning, and Daniel was out walking Biscuit, giving me privacy. I sat on the couch with Mochi in my lap and dialed my dad's personal cell, the one my mother didn't know he had. "Hey, sweetheart," he said when he picked up. "Everything okay?" "Dad," I said, and then I told him everything. The phone call from Vanessa, her calculated announcement about the pregnancy, my fear that she was planning something for the wedding, the pattern I'd spent my whole life watching. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. "I know," he finally said. "I've been watching too." "What do you mean?" "Your sister has been different lately, calmer on the surface. But I've caught her doing things, going through wedding magazines and tearing out pages, talking to your mother about colors and dresses. And last week, I found something in her closet." My heart started pounding. "What? A white dress," he said. Not her bridesmaid dress, a white gown, long, expensive looking. I couldn't breathe for a moment. The room felt like it was tilting. She wouldn't. Even Vanessa wouldn't wear white to her sister's wedding. "I confronted your mother about it," my father continued. "She said Vanessa was probably just trying things on for fun, that it didn't mean anything." "And you believe that?" He sighed. "I believe your mother will believe anything that protects the image of the family she's created in her head. But I don't. I've been living in this house for 35 years, Rachel. I know exactly who my wife and younger daughter are." "Then why?" I started, but I couldn't finish. The old anger was rising, the decades-old question of why he never protected me. "I know," he said gently. "I should have done more. I should have said more. I made excuses for years, told myself I was keeping the peace, avoiding conflict. But watching what happened with Tyler, watching your sister spiral, she's gotten worse. And I'm done being silent." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to prepare," he said, "for whatever she tries. I'm not going to let her ruin your day, Rachel. I promise you that." I didn't know what to say. In 30 years, I'd never heard my father speak like this, like he was ready to fight for me. "Thank you," I finally whispered. "I've been talking to my therapist about all of this," he admitted. "I started seeing someone after your grandmother's funeral. Did you know that?" "No, I had no idea. She helped me see some things, about enabling, about complicity, about the damage done by standing by." He paused. "I've been too much of a coward for too long. But I'm going to make this right." We talked for another hour. He told me about his sessions, about the guilt he carried, about watching me struggle, and making excuses for not intervening. He told me about the conversations he'd tried to have with my mother, all of which ended with her crying and accusing him of favoring me over Vanessa. He told me about finding the white dress and feeling something finally snap in his chest. "I'm putting together a toast," he said toward the end, "the father of the bride toast. I've been working on it for weeks, and if Vanessa tries anything, if she does what I think she's going to do, I'll be ready." I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And something else. a fragile, terrifying belief that maybe for once, someone was going to stand up for me. The weeks leading up to the wedding were surreal. I went through the motions: final dress fitting, venue walkthrough, seating chart negotiations, but part of me was just waiting. Waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for Vanessa to strike. She was suspiciously pleasant. She came to the bridal shower my friends threw me in Seattle and gave me a beautiful cashmere throw blanket. She texted me photos of her baby bump with sweet messages about how she couldn't wait for our kids to be cousins. She even called me once, tipsy on wine, to tell me she was happy for me. "I love you, Rach," she slurred. "You deserve this. You deserve everything." I thanked her and hung up and sat there for 10 minutes, trying to figure out if she meant it or if it was all part of some elaborate act. Daniel noticed how on edge I was. The night before we drove down to Portland for the wedding weekend, he pulled me into his arms and held me for a long time. "Whatever happens," he said into my hair, "we're getting married. That's all that matters. You and me." "You and me?" I repeated. But I kept thinking about that white dress in Vanessa's closet. June 17th, 2022, the rehearsal dinner. We held it at a restaurant called The Gilded Pear, my mother's choice, a place with white tablecloths and too many forks and a wine list thicker than my thesis. 50 people, close family, and wedding party only. I wore a cream-colored silk dress that Daniel said made me look like starlight. Vanessa arrived in a tight red dress that showcased her 6-month bump. Grant had his hand on her back like he was steering a boat. She looked beautiful, glowing, and she smiled at everyone like she was the guest of honor. I kept waiting for something, a comment, a dig, a scene. But she was perfectly behaved. She gave a sweet toast about sisterhood and new beginnings. She posed for photos with genuine smiles. She even complimented my dress without a trace of sarcasm. Afterwards, in the parking lot, my father caught my eye. He gave me a small nod. "Tomorrow," he mouthed. I nodded back. June 18th, 2022. My wedding day. I woke up at 6 in the morning at the Whitmore Gardens estate, where I'd spent the night in the bridal suite. My friends Kelsey and Mariana were already awake, making coffee and laying out makeup palettes. The morning light was soft gold through the windows, and I could hear birds singing outside. "It's your day," Kelsey said, handing me a mug. "How do you feel?" "Nervous," I admitted, "but good. Ready." The morning was a blur of hair and makeup, champagne toasts, and tearful moments. My mother arrived at 9 with a photographer in tow, already dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Vanessa wasn't with her. "She's getting ready in her own room," my mother explained when I asked. "Said she wanted to rest before the ceremony." I didn't think much of it. Pregnant women need rest. It made sense. The ceremony started at 4. The sun was warm but not too hot. The roses were in full bloom, and there was a gentle breeze that made everything feel like a dream. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, and when I saw Daniel waiting at the end, crying openly, I forgot about everything else. We said our vows. We exchanged rings. We kissed while everyone cheered. And for one perfect hour, I really believed that everything would be okay. The reception was in the ballroom. Fairy lights strung from the ceiling, tables decorated with candles and greenery. A live band playing soft jazz as guests found their seats. I floated through cocktail hour on Daniel's arm, accepting congratulations, hugging relatives, feeling like the whole world was finally seeing me. Vanessa was there, wearing her sage green bridesmaid dress, smiling sweetly at everyone who asked about her pregnancy. She told me the dress was a little tight on her bump, but she'd manage. She told me I looked beautiful. She said she was so happy for me. I almost believed her. The timeline for the reception was carefully planned. Dinner first, then the father-daughter dance, then the cake cutting, then open dancing until midnight. I'd agonized over every detail, wanting everything to be perfect. Dinner was served at 6:30, salmon or filet mignon, roasted vegetables, bread so good 3 different people asked me for the name of the caterer. I sat at the head table with Daniel, our hands linked under the tablecloth, barely eating because I was too busy smiling at everyone. Vanessa was seated at a table near the front with Grant and my parents. She seemed fine, normal. She ate her dinner and laughed at something Grant said and rubbed her belly in that instinctive way pregnant women do. 7:30. Time for the father-daughter dance. My father came to get me as the band started playing Unforgettable by Nat King Cole. It was the song my grandmother used to sing when she'd rock me to sleep as a child, and I'd chosen it specifically for that reason. My father and I walked onto the dance floor alone, and for a moment, everything was perfect. He held me carefully, like I was something precious. His eyes were wet. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "You know that, right? I'm so proud of the woman you've become. I love you, Dad." We swayed together, and I rested my head on his shoulder, and I thought about my grandmother watching from somewhere, finally seeing me get my moment. That's when I heard it. The clink of glass against glass, sharp and insistent, cutting through the music like a knife. I looked up. Vanessa was standing at her table, champagne flute raised, tapping a knife against it. Grant was tugging at her arm, trying to get her to sit down. My mother was frozen, fork halfway to her mouth. Vanessa wasn't wearing the sage green bridesmaid dress anymore. She was wearing a floor-length white gown, an actual wedding dress, complete with a sweetheart neckline and crystal beading on the bodice. Her hair was down in loose waves, a baby's breath crown on her head. She looked like a bride. She looked like she was trying to be me. The music stopped. Everyone stopped. 200 pairs of eyes turned to look at my sister, standing there in white at my wedding, one hand on her pregnant belly, champagne flute raised high. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice carrying through the sudden silence, "but I have an announcement I just couldn't wait to share." I felt my father's arm go rigid around me. His hand tightened on my waist. "Grant and I are having twins," Vanessa continued, and she was smiling now, that satisfied smirk I'd seen so many times. "We just found out yesterday, and I know this is Rachel's day, but I couldn't keep it in any longer. I'm just so happy." She started crying then, these pretty, delicate tears that rolled down her cheeks without smudging her mascara. Typical Vanessa, always able to cry on command. My mother leaped up from her chair and rushed toward Vanessa, arms outstretched. "Oh, my baby, twins!" She embraced Vanessa right there on the edge of the dance floor, while I stood frozen in my father's arms. I couldn't move, couldn't think. This was worse than anything I'd imagined. She'd actually worn white. She'd actually interrupted my father-daughter dance. She'd actually announced her pregnancy at my wedding. And my mother was hugging her like Vanessa was the one getting married. "All right, I want to check in with you again. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have screamed, cried, left? Type what you would have done in the comments. I want to know. And if you're dying to see what happens next, make sure you're subscribed. I'll tell you what I did. Nothing. I stood there in my wedding dress on my wedding day, in my father's arms, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even cry. I was frozen, watching my moment be stolen. Again, like I'd been watching my whole life. But my father wasn't frozen. He stepped away from me, slowly, deliberately. He straightened his jacket. He walked toward the band and said something to the lead singer that I couldn't hear. Then he walked to the center of the dance floor, put his fingers in his mouth and whistled. It was the kind of whistle that makes everyone go quiet, the kind you can't ignore. My mother stopped mid-embrace. Vanessa looked up, tears still glistening artfully on her cheeks. Grant had his head in his hands, and every single guest turned to look at my father. "Before we continue celebrating my daughter," he said, his voice carrying in the silence, "I'd like to say a few words. As the father of the bride, I believe it's my duty to give a toast." He walked to the head table and picked up a microphone. He was calm, deliberate. Something about him was different, a steel in his spine I'd never seen before. "Vanessa, please stay standing," he said. "I'd like everyone to see you." She beamed, thinking this was her moment. She actually posed a little, one hand on her belly, the other still holding her champagne flute. "My wife and I have 2 daughters," my father began. "Rachel, who stands before you as a bride, and Vanessa, who has decided to announce her pregnancy during the father-daughter dance while wearing a white wedding gown." A murmur went through the crowd. Some nervous laughter, quickly stifled. "I want to tell you a story," my father continued. "When Rachel was 8 years old, she performed in her first piano recital. She was so nervous she threw up that morning, but she still went on stage and played beautifully. After, we took her out for ice cream to celebrate. But we never actually celebrated because Vanessa pretended to be sick, and the night became about her instead." The room was dead silent now. When Rachel was 12, we threw her a birthday party. 6 friends, a slumber party, and a homemade cake from her grandmother. Vanessa interrupted with a talent show that lasted 20 minutes. My mother-in-law, God rest her soul, was so upset she left early. Vanessa's smile was faltering. She looked at my mother, who was frozen in place. When Rachel was 16, she had her first boyfriend. Vanessa sent him lies about Rachel. He broke up with her the next day. My father paused. Rachel cried for 2 weeks. Vanessa laughed about it at dinner. "Dad," Vanessa said, her voice thin. "What are you doing? I'm giving a toast," he said calmly. When Rachel was 20, she brought a young man home for Easter. Vanessa made inappropriate advances toward him, then claimed Rachel had called her names. That relationship ended too. "Dad!" Vanessa's voice was rising now, a hint of panic. "Stop it!" But he didn't stop. When Rachel got engaged, he continued. Vanessa made sure to announce her pregnancy in a way that made it about herself. When we started planning the wedding, my wife found Vanessa trying on white dresses. When I asked Vanessa about it, she said she was just looking. He held up a folded piece of paper. "This," he said, "is a receipt from Bellissima Bridal in Lake Oswego, dated 3 months ago. 1 floor-length white gown with crystal beading, $847.12, charged to a credit card in my name, which Vanessa added herself to without my permission." Gasps now, audible gasps. I saw my Aunt Patricia cover her mouth with her hand. "I have been complicit in enabling my younger daughter's behavior for 30 years, my father said. His voice cracked, just slightly. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself Caroline would handle it, or that Vanessa would grow out of it, or that Rachel was strong enough to survive. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with tears. She was strong. She survived. But she shouldn't have had to. He turned back to Vanessa, who was no longer crying. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Grant was standing now, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on the planet. "Tonight was supposed to be about Rachel," my father said. "Her day, her moment. And you decided to steal it anyway. You wore white to your sister's wedding. You announced your pregnancy during the father-daughter dance. You couldn't let her have one single thing." He paused. "So here's my toast." He raised his glass. The room held its breath. "To my daughter Rachel, who has never once in her entire life tried to take anything that wasn't hers, who has worked hard and loved deeply and forgiven more than anyone should ever have to forgive, who is getting married today to a wonderful man who sees her for exactly who she is." He looked at Vanessa again. "And to my daughter Vanessa, who is no longer welcome in this ballroom, or in my home, or in my life. Mom. Vanessa turned to our mother, who had finally unfrozen and was rushing forward. David, my mother hissed. David, what are you doing? This is Caroline. My father's voice was gentle but absolute. For 35 years, I have let you dictate how this family operates. I have watched you enable our daughter's cruelty. I have watched you dismiss our other daughter's pain. Tonight it stops. You're making a scene, my mother whispered, her eyes darting around the room at all the watching faces. Number. My father shook his head. Vanessa made a scene. I'm just telling the truth about it. He turned back to the crowd. I apologize to all of you for this disruption. The wedding will continue. The bride and groom will cut their cake. There will be dancing and joy and celebration, because that is what Rachel deserves. He looked at Vanessa one more time. Please leave. Now. You can't just, Vanessa started. But she was cut off by a voice I didn't expect. He's right. Everyone turned. It was Grant. Grant, who had been silent this entire time, who had tried to pull Vanessa down when she first stood up, who looked like a man watching his life unravel. He's right, Grant repeated, his voice shaking. I told you not to do this. I told you it was wrong, but you said your family expected it. You said this was just how things were done. Grant, Vanessa said, reaching for him. He stepped back. You told me Rachel was dramatic, that she made things up, that your parents just liked to tease. But I've been watching tonight. I watched you change into that dress. I watched you practice that announcement in the mirror. He ran a hand through his hair. You weren't surprised by your father's speech. You were counting on being able to cry your way out of it. Grant, that's not... I saw the other texts, Vanessa. A hush fell over the room. I didn't know what texts he meant, but clearly Vanessa did, because her face went from pale to gray. The ones you sent to your friend Jessica, Grant continued, his voice hollow, about how you were going to ruin Rachel's big day and remind everyone who the real star is. About how pregnancy was the perfect cover because nobody can criticize a pregnant woman. Vanessa said nothing. We're done, Grant said. I don't know who you are, but you're not the woman I thought I was building a life with. He walked toward the exit. Vanessa didn't follow. She just stood there in her white dress in front of 200 people, completely alone. My mother was crying now, real crying, not the pretty tears Vanessa could produce on demand. Mascara was running down her face. She looked from Vanessa to my father to me, and for a moment I thought she might say something redemptive, might apologize, might acknowledge what had happened. Instead, she said, "How could you do this to our family?" She was looking at my father, not at Vanessa, at my father. I expected him to crumble, to apologize, to smooth things over the way he always had. Instead, he smiled sadly and said, "I'm not doing anything to our family, Caroline. I'm protecting it. For the first time in my life, I'm protecting it." He walked over to me and took my hand. "Would you like to cut your cake now, sweetheart?" I couldn't speak. I could only nod. The rest of the night exists in fragments in my memory. Cutting the cake, Daniel's hand warm on mine. Dancing, my feet aching but my heart full. Guests hugging me, telling me how brave my father was, how they'd always known something was off with Vanessa. My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, cornering me by the bar to say she was proud of me and that she'd stopped attending family events years ago because she couldn't stomach watching anymore. Vanessa left within minutes of Grant's departure. She walked out in her white dress, alone without a word. My mother followed her, but I didn't know that until later. They apparently sat in the parking lot for an hour, my mother trying to convince Vanessa to come back and apologize, Vanessa refusing. They didn't return. At midnight, Daniel and I stood on the balcony of the bridal suite looking out at the gardens below. The fairy lights were still strung through the roses, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the band playing the final slow song. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I feel like I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop." He pulled me close. It already dropped. "And you survived. More than survived. My father, I couldn't get over it. My father actually did it. He did. He showed up for you." I started crying then, the tears I'd been holding in all night finally breaking free. I cried for the 8-year-old who never got to celebrate her recital, for the 12-year-old whose birthday was hijacked, for the 16-year-old who lost her first boyfriend, for the 20-year-old who learned to stop bringing people home. I cried for all the years I'd convinced myself that I was the problem, that I was too sensitive, that if I just tried harder to get along with my sister, everything would be fine. Daniel held me through all of it. In the weeks after the wedding, everything changed. My father moved out of the house. He rented an apartment in Portland, a small one-bedroom with a view of the river, and he started the divorce proceedings within a month. My mother fought him, threatened him, called him every name in the book. She couldn't understand how he could choose Rachel over his own wife, as if those things were mutually exclusive, as if choosing to protect one daughter meant abandoning his marriage. The truth was, the marriage had been dead for years. My father told me later that he'd been planning to leave after the wedding anyway, regardless of what Vanessa did. He'd spoken to a divorce attorney in January. He'd started separating finances in March. Vanessa's stunt at the reception just gave him the clarity to do it publicly, to stop protecting the family image my mother cared so much about. Vanessa had the twins in October, 2 months earlier than expected. Grant wasn't at the hospital. He'd broken up with her for good after the wedding and moved to California for work. His parents' money, which she'd been counting on, vanished with him. My mother, predictably, stepped in. She moved Vanessa and the babies into the family home, the one my father had left, and started posting on Facebook about being a devoted grandmother. The posts were full of words like, "Blessed and family is everything in my beautiful grandbabies." I muted her. I didn't block her. Not yet, but I muted her so I wouldn't have to see it. My father and I had dinner together once a month. He'd drive up to Seattle and we'd go to a quiet restaurant where we could talk for hours. He told me about therapy, about unpacking decades of conflict avoidance, about learning to set boundaries at 60 years old. "I'm sorry," he said during one of those dinners. "I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner. I'm sorry you had to carry it alone for so long." "You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." He shook his head. "It matters. But so does the past. I need you to know that I see it. All of it. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making it up to you." We don't always get the parents we deserve. Sometimes we get the ones who fail us, who look the other way, who prioritize peace over justice. But sometimes, if we're lucky, those parents wake up. Sometimes they find the courage to change, and sometimes, even if it takes 30 years, they finally show up. My father showed up, late, imperfect, but real. The first year of marriage was harder than I expected, but not because of Daniel. Because of me. I'd spent so long bracing for impact, waiting for betrayal, assuming the worst, that I didn't know how to exist in a relationship where someone actually wanted my happiness. Daniel was patient. He held space for my trauma without making it his own. He suggested couples therapy 3 months in, not because we were struggling, but because he wanted to understand how to support me better. We went every other week, and it was the best thing we ever did. I also started seeing my own therapist again, a woman named Dr. Keene who specialized in family systems and narcissistic abuse. She was the one who finally put words to what I'd experienced my whole life. Your sister has traits consistent with narcissistic personality disorder, she said during one session. Your mother is likely a covert narcissist who enabled your sister's behavior because it reflected back on her. Your father was what we call a passive enabler, someone who saw the abuse but couldn't find the strength to intervene. It helped to have language for it. It helped to know I wasn't crazy, wasn't dramatic, wasn't making things up. The patterns I'd seen my whole life were real. The manipulation was intentional, and my feelings about it were completely valid. 6 months after the wedding, Vanessa reached out. It was a text message, the first contact we'd had since she walked out of the reception in her white dress. "Hey," it read, "I know we haven't talked. I've been thinking a lot about things. Grant left for good, and Mom is driving me crazy. I think I need to apologize to you." I stared at that message for 3 days before responding. "An apology is welcome," I finally wrote, "but it needs to be real. Not words, actions. I need to see consistent change before I'm willing to rebuild anything." Her response came immediately. "I get that. Can we meet?" I want to explain what was going through my head. I consulted Dr. Keene. I talked to Daniel. I called my father. Everyone said the same thing. Trust your gut. If you don't feel ready, you don't have to go. I didn't feel ready, but I also felt something else, a flicker of hope that maybe, somehow, things could be different. That maybe the wedding disaster had broken something open in Vanessa the way it had in my father. That maybe there was still a chance for us to be sisters. So I agreed to meet. We chose a coffee shop in Portland, neutral territory. I drove down on a Saturday morning and arrived early, claiming a table by the window where I could see her coming. She walked in looking different than I remembered. Thinner, exhausted. The pregnancy weight was gone, but so was something else. The glow, the confidence, the perpetual performance. She looked, for the first time I could remember, like a real person instead of a show. She slid into the booth across from me. "Thanks for coming," she said. I nodded and waited. She took a breath. "I practiced this so many times. There's so much I want to say, but I keep getting stuck on—" She trailed off. "I don't even know how to say sorry for all of it. It's too big." "Start somewhere," I said. So she did. For the next hour, she talked. About growing up desperate for attention, about realizing early on that Mom